If you've decided to extend your networking capabilities into your Windows Azure subscription, then this is where virtual networks come into play. Now, we know that we can create things like virtual machines within Azure, and then any virtual machine that you might create is entirely accessible to your internal users. They can use any given application to access that system. Maybe they're accessing a database, maybe they're accessing a website. Regardless, they do have access to that particular system. But of course, you might have multiple systems. You might have multiple websites, multiple databases, multiple storage accounts, whatever it might be. So when you are dealing with multiple resources like this, it makes possibly more sense to place them into a virtual network. So let's have a look at just getting started with virtual network configuration. So we're just going to click down here in our networks option, and you can see we have nothing set up. So we're just going to go ahead and click on create virtual network. So we just have to give it a name like anything else. So let's call this my VNet 1. And then whenever you create a virtual network, it does have to be assigned to an affinity group. Now this just places them in particular geographic locations, the data centers, it assigns them to those. So if you don't already have an affinity group, that's no problem. You can just hit the drop down here and you can just tell it to create one at this point in time, and it will go ahead and do those two steps at once. I already have one, so I can just choose the one that's there by default. Now, a couple of quick things on this page, the DNS servers and the VPN connectivity. We'll discuss those later, but the DNS, on the assumption that you're going to have name resolution somewhere in this network, then obviously we do need a DNS server. However, as we saw in our virtual machine environment there a minute ago, I don't even have any virtual machines here. So I don't have a DNS server. So with it not existing, obviously I cannot supply the information that it needs here, but that's not a problem because it allows you to go back and enter the DNS server after the fact. So this one is not required. Now the VPN connectivity, another subject we'll discuss later, but you've got two options here, point to site, which is in preview, so it's not fully released yet, or site to site. Now, if you are going to use the site to site, then you actually have to set this up now. You have to enable this right now during creation and configure it through that process. You cannot do that later. So we'll see that later on, but if you're setting it up at this point, you must set that option now. Since this one is in preview, you can actually configure the point to site at either right now or afterward. So we'll discuss both of those later, but for now we're just going to leave both of them blank. And then we see the address space that we can get. Now it gives you your standard address spaces for the private values of your 10 networks, or I can hit the drop down here and choose something maybe it's more applicable, the 172 or the 192, whatever you feel is appropriate, and obviously it depends on the number of systems that you're looking to host and or just something that matches your current configuration. So let's just go with something smaller here with the standard 192.168, and let's just set it to its standard size as well with a /24. And then we can have subnets within that if desirable. You see, again, it is creating a single subnet here. And if we just want a single one, then we can do that as well. We can just set whatever values you feel are appropriate. Now, these also can be altered and or changed, completely removed, deleted, updated, whatever, after the fact. So if you do make a mistake here in creation, that's no problem. We can also add in another address space if we wanted to and completely go with the 10 network or 172, whatever you feel. No worries about getting anything wrong here. We can change those later on. So once we've got our address space, we're just going to click on next or complete, and that's going to pretty much assign that address space to that network, and then we'll have a look at some of the configuration options that we can do and how we add resources into that virtual network a little bit later on. But there's our first virtual network, so we can just click on this and we can verify that it has been created. We see there's a dashboard where we can start viewing the properties and seeing which resources are in there, and we've got configuration options wherein we can set our DNS servers. There's your point to site connectivity. and or make the changes to the address space. So we're set to go with our first virtual network.